Coming up on Friday at Churchill Downs, it's the Grade 1 Clark presented by Norton Healthcare. Joe Christofek and Scott Shapiro. And Scott, winding down the 2022 season here at Churchill Downs with closing weekend. The Clark, one of the biggest races of the year at Churchill Downs, sans Kentucky Derby week. And the Kentucky Derby winner is going to be one of the likely favorites.
Without question, Joe, good to be back with you here as we have kind of see a lot of each other this week and this month. But it'll also be really good to see the Derby winner here back at Churchill Downs after putting a pretty solid run together in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Of course, nobody was getting to Flightline that day. And then two-back Rich Strike with a thrilling finish in the Lucas Classic where Hot Rod Charlie battled back. But he's probably going to take a ton of public support in here, and he should be rolling late over a racetrack he loves.
Was Willpower a horse that is in fantastic form for Brad Cox right now, who also has both bases covered with Folsom? How do you figure the early pace is going to shake out in this 9 furlong contest?
Yeah, a little bit tricky to figure out. You've got Trademark, who's moving up in class, drawn inside other rivals. I would expect Martin Garcia to need to be somewhat aggressive out of the gate. And you have Injunction stretching out to 1 1/8 after a one-turn mile runner-up effort to Senor Buscador in the Grade 3 ACAC. And then you have the aforementioned West Will Power, who I'm not sure at this point if he needs the lead, but he certainly has taken advantage of slow early paces in his last two, including a dominant win in the Grade 2 Fiat at Keeneland at this same distance. But I would think it would be somewhat contentious, Joe, but not overly chaotic.
It's interesting that West Willpower did lose by a head to Injunction in their encounter back at Ellis Park on August the 6th. Also involved in that race was Last Samurai. Who would have thought, Scott, that the R.A. Cowboy Jones would be a major prep for the Clark?
Not me when I tuned in on August 6th to the racing at the Pea Patch, but it certainly has played out that way, Joe. But I'm going to go to the other Cox runner in here in Folsom, who I think is going to be the right price. This is a very price-dependent, as you like to say, race in terms of picking horses to me and wagering, because I don't fully trust anybody in this race at a 2-to-1 price or anywhere close to it. And I think Folsom's number is a little bit slower than some of the others. His form has been darkened in his last couple of races. The ACAC, too sharp for him. The one-turn mile really didn't pick up his feet that day. And then last time out, he lost to his stablemate West Will Power in the Fayette, but they crawled on the front end that day. We know Folsom likes it here at Churchill. He's 8 for 16 in his career, and he could be set for a big run and probably the biggest win of his career.
He's not a win machine, Proxy, but I think he's in the right spot here, and I think he's extremely well intended for Mike Stidham. When horses of this caliber, particularly when they're bred this well, campaign in their 3-4-year-old years, the goal is to get a Grade 1 win. That's what the goal is for Proxy here. They put this horse away after the Stephen Foster, reading Mike Stidham's mind and the connections from Godolphin. Let's not take on the heavy hitters at the end of the year. Let's not point toward the Breeders' Cup Classic. Let's bring a fresh horse back to the Clark, get a Grade 1 win, which should upgrade this horse as a potential stallion prospect. He's run some huge races in his career. He was a good third in the Stephen Foster, going the same 9 furlong distance over this track behind Olympiad, who wound up finishing second in the Breeders' Cup Classic. I thought that was one of Proxy's best performances of his career, Scott, and he employs the dollar sign Joel Rosario, who I think is a perfect fit for him.
Yeah, he was aboard him in that aforementioned Stephen Foster, where he did get a good race shape, but did finish very well from well off the pace. I struggled to come up with a strong opinion on Proxy. His numbers suggest that he could easily win this race, but I think, like you said, he's not a win machine, and I wonder if sometimes his efforts are a little bit overstated in terms of numbers with the right setup. But he's run some really good races and should be finishing extremely well in what I think is a wide-open rendition. Where do you stand on Rich Strike before we finish up?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you. So Rich Strike originally was going to point to the Clark and not run in the Classic. He runs in the Classic. He runs a decent fourth at Keeneland behind, a horse that nobody was going to beat that day. And, now he's running in the Clark almost as an afterthought after getting beat double-digit lengths by Flightline. So to me, he's going to be overbet. You know that he's going to be overbet. I love Proxy because he's been pointed to this race. I think I'm going to get an extra tick or two up in odds because of it. Even if Proxy plods along and runs second or third, I still think I'm making the right bet.
Rich Strike, I agree, will be an underlay, win or lose. He certainly, we know, loves it here at Churchill Downs. I wonder if 1.125 is a little sharper than he wants. I know he ran well in the Lucas Classic, but he loomed up. And I think, with the Rich Strike we had seen in all of his other races, you would have thought was going to go right by Hot Rod Charlie, but maybe was up a little closer to the pace than he wanted to be. The 9 furlongs a little too sharp and kind of hung a tiny bit, because Hot Rod Charlie, certainly not a horse known for turning horses away. In fact, probably the opposite. So while I think Rich Strike is going to run his race, you bring up a good point about not being pointed for this race. And again, I wonder if the 9 furlongs is a little sharper than he ideally wants.
Scott and I both opposing the Kentucky Derby winner in the Clark. I'm going to go with a Proxy. Scott's going to go with a little bit more of a price in Folsom. And don't forget, on Friday and throughout closing weekend, the Hit It and Split It promotion, the late pick 4 at Churchill Downs. Make sure you opt in at Twin Spires. If you bet the late pick 4 and you hit it, you'll get your share of $2,000. For Scott Shapiro, I'm Joe Christofek. Enjoy the Clark.